They always were after us for something. It's always been water. It's just they want the water, and if you don't have the means to fight them, you lost the ranch.
Burns is a quiet town, but on a bitterly cold day, people are gathering to protest.
Militia groups from out of state came to show support for 2 Oregon ranchers who must go back to prison for starting fires that burned on federal land, even though they already served time for the charges.
It was actually making the national news in a big way.
The case has caused a stir as both were charged under the anti-terrorism law, sparking debate over the federal government's authority.
Why did they charge him with an anti-terrorism statute? The only reason I could think of was to put him in jail as long as they possibly could. But then everything went crazy.
Let's take you to Oregon now, where armed protesters have taken over the headquarters of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge.
Call me an occupier, call me a terrorist, call me a dadgum ignorant redneck. I don't care. I am here for Dwight Hammond, and they had better get out of that prison.
You know, they say that there was an armed standoff in Harney County. That is a total bullshit lie.
The Hammonds are ranchers in a remarkable place in southern Oregon.
The Hammonds are the kind of people that you want to live next door. Really, really nice, down-home folks. Dwight is a very soft-spoken man, very kind, helpful. He'll do anything if you ask him to help you out. Steve is active, quiet and soft-spoken like his father, very family-oriented, a very nice human, and a very hardworking human.
They're very compassionate people. You can find other ranchers in the community that say, hey, you know, I needed to ship my cattle out and I didn't have any way of shipping them, and the Hammonds showed up with their trucks and hauled my cattle for me.
While I was building my log home up on the property that I purchased, they actually came one afternoon with a picnic lunch. And this is 45, 50 miles away. Those are the kind of people the Hammonds are.
Dwight Hammond is my husband, and we've been married for 55 years. We grew up together. In 1964, we first moved here from Northern California. The tending of the population was to come north, and we were raising cattle, and the highways were becoming more congested, and highways and cows don't really mix. And we finally found this place that we liked. Dwight had the problem of telling his father that we weren't going to live in Northern California for our whole lifetime. One day he said he was going to go and tell Dad today that we were moving. He was gone for 2 or 3 hours, and he came back, and I said, how'd it go? You'd never guess. He wants to go with us. So we all moved up here.
It's a very big ranch. It's on a place called Steen's Mountain. Well, it doesn't look like any mountain in the world except itself. And it's in Harney County.
So Harney County is 10,000 square miles. It's about 2/3 high desert. Most of it is above 4,000 feet in elevation. And we have several 100,000 acres of state lands here. And the county is bigger than 9 states in this nation. Harney County in general is a community made up of small town folks who work hard for a living, ranching families that go back for generations.
You can see why the Hammonds wanted to ranch there. They, like most ranchers, have a grazing permit, which means they have private base commensurable property. That's their own, and it has been. And they own the water on that.
What's known as the Dust Bowl, which is the Hammond's property, there's a drainage that comes off of the mountain that actually has quite a bit of water.
Our ranch is special in that the water comes up on our ranch. The laws are in the state of Oregon, if it comes up on your ranch, you can use it until it goes off. You use the water or you lose it.
Adjacent to the Hammond property, on 3 sides, is the National Wildlife Refuge.
Mount Hero National Wildlife Refuge is 190,000 acres in the middle of Harney County.
It used to be all private land ranches. And through the Antiquities Act, President Roosevelt determined that there would be a bird refuge there.
The Fish and Wildlife Service decided that they were going to manage it so that all of the resources went to the wildlife, including water rights that they didn't own.
Even though that the National Wildlife Refuge has water, the Hammond property has a good deal of water. The Hammond property would augment the National Wildlife Refuge land greatly.
The refuge system made a decision to survey their property lines and move their fences, created all kinds of issues for access for the Hammonds, access to their home.
The Fish and Wildlife Service built a fence, or tried to build a fence, around the Hammond's water. And somebody got an old antique road grader and put it in the way of the construction equipment.
Dwight had parked a piece of machinery down there because we had a bunch of cattle in there. There was 1,100 acres in that field. If they came in and built the fence and we didn't know it, the cattle would die from lack of water.
In 1994, there was an altercation that occurred where federal agents had come onto Hammond's property and handcuffed Dwight and drug him off to prison.
And so the feds had to come take him up to Portland and put him in jail in a federal holding cell. And they stayed there for longer than they should.
We took it to court. It was a big, long trial, and we ended up winning. And then they did nothing to remove the fence or to make it accessible to us. And we knew that if we removed the fence or if we did anything, we would be charged with destruction of federal property or whatever. So I went back to the judge and asked him, what's the next step? He just shook his head and was bewildered himself. He said he couldn't do anything. He couldn't even subpoena a federal agency to come into his courtroom. They wouldn't show up. A little bit later, we got into water problems again, same kind of a scenario. You just had to be so careful because they were just waiting to throw somebody in jail for some reason. It's just they want the water, and if you don't have the means to fight them, you lost the ranch. It was kind of like cancer. They called us to Salem and threw a 19-count indictment over 18 years, I believe, for setting every fire that they didn't have already tagged to somebody else Anything that had happened on that place was put into a case that was charged against Dwight or Stephen.
It was a huge number of fires that they were accused of committing. Absolutely absurd. The first arson that they accused them of occurred in 2001, and it took them 10 years to file any charges. I mean, my goodness, 10 years. What Dwight and Steve did isn't in the same category as arson. What Dwight and Steve did was start a fire to try and make their land better. That's what a prescribed burn does. It's a common practice within the ranching industries. They lit the fire in early afternoon after the temperatures had warmed up on their property, and then at night the winds turn around and blow from the top of the mountain down to the bottom of the valley again. So that takes the fire and pushes it back on itself, and the temperatures cool off and the fires lay down and go out. But what happens to the grass is when it comes back healthier, the brush is gone, and it's actually better for elk and cows in the future. One section of the fire trail ran up a draw and burned 138 acres of BLM allotment land. 138 acres is huge if you consider it in a highly dense populated city. But out here, there's hundreds of thousands of acres where you have uninterrupted views, really nothing, just wide open spaces. So 138 acres is just this ridge top here and a little bit of that finger over there. Normally what occurs is they get what's called a fire trespass from the BLM, because what happens is it takes that grass out of grazing season for a couple of years. And so the BLM loses like $400. It is not against the law anywhere in the United States to manage a prescribed burn. Then the next fires were a series of fires that occurred in 2006. The 2006 fires, when those occurred, it was a lightning storm beyond lightning storm. There were like 1,700 lightning strikes. The whole goddamn mountain was on fire. Steve calls the BLM to find out if there was a fire burning up on Moon Hill. Sure enough, there is a fire. Well, that's where all their winter feed is. So what Steve did was start a back burn. You have a fire that's moving towards you, and what you try to do is, if you can get in front of the fire enough, you burn a section. You burn some land to remove the fuel. He lit the back burn, burned his own property, and then it burned 1 acre. 1 acre of BLM land, and the fire didn't go any further. What they charged them with was the 1996 anti-terrorism and death penalty law of arson. So say I was Timothy McVeigh and I blew up the Oklahoma federal building and it started a fire that then went along, they could charge me under the statute with blowing things up, killing people, and arson. That is the arson they were charged with.
Our family members are not terrorists. I don't know how you could put a charge like terrorism when you look at the things that are going on in the world and compare that to ranch life in Eastern Oregon.
Why did they charge him with an anti-terrorism statute? The only reason I could think of was to put him in jail as long as they possibly could. Including opening and closing statements, the trial took 8 days. The 2 fires that they were found guilty of were the 2 fires that they had admitted to starting. The 2001 prescribed burn that got away from them onto their allotment land for 138 acres, and then the 2006 fire that Steve had lit to protect their winter feed. The jury was tasked of finding innocence or guilt, whether they were part of a conspiracy, whether they had maliciously started all of those fires that the BLM had accused them of starting. but they were not aware that the charges brought against them were from the 1996 Anti-Terrorism and Death Penalty Act that carried a mandatory minimum of 5 years.
What's a mandatory minimum sentence? If, for example, you are convicted of kidnapping in the first degree, you're going to go to prison for 90 months. And because it's a mandatory minimum, you're going to do every minute of those 90 months. You're not going to get paroled out early. You get a 90-month sentence, you're going to do 90 months.
No, I don't think the jury would have convicted Dwight and Steve if they would have understood that the penalty was a 5-year mandatory minimum. Well, Dwight's 74 years old, and to have Dwight be convicted of an anti-terrorism charge for 5 years is potentially a death sentence for him. The lawyers talked to the judge, and the Hammonds agreed to accept the jury's verdict as they had been stated thus far, and they would accept whatever the judge sentenced them to. And the prosecution then spouted up and said that he agreed with that, but they would have to give up their appellate rights as well as their 2255 rights, that they gave up all rights of appealing.
There is nobody that can sanely say that this was terrorism. The presiding judge, Michael Hogan, even said that it would be a terrible injustice. In fact, the words he used were, it would shock the conscience, quote unquote, to require that the father and son ranchers go to prison for 5 years for what they did.
He gave them what he thought was a just sentence, which was 3 months for Dwight and a year for Stephen. I hate to think that your government could take away your ranch, but it's obvious, if you look back at it and don't have a biased opinion, that they wanted our ranch. Fire, if that's what it took, they'd take whatever was handed to them.
When there were new states coming in, there was what was called public land. Now, it meant something in those days. It doesn't anymore. But what it meant then was it was for sale to the public. Come to Ohio and buy this section of land and pay us not much, and it's yours. We need the population. We need to settle this new state. They made it easy. But there was a trick. Every new state had to sign a compact in what's called an enabling act that would enable you to vote and become a state with the federal government, that all of the citizens of this new state now and forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated lands of this new state. That meant that the states didn't own the land except for the part that had already been bought. If it was private property already, the federal government didn't bother about that. They did bother about the stuff that was left. The meaning of public land had changed. It just meant not something you could buy as time went on. It meant something that the federal government owned. What is the government going to do with this land that's supposed to be public?
The Southwest might seem a lonely place, big and barren, of not much use, an empty wasteland. But it does grow grass, and from that grass flows one of America's greatest production lines, the cattle of the beef industry.
They began to see that some of this land was not going to be used by settlers. It was too arid, it was not fertile, and so the Taylor Grazing Act allowed for ranchers to go on public lands, raise their cattle or sheep, and pay the federal government some minimum amount.
This is the land, the public land. It belongs to you and me. More than 300 million acres of land. More than an acre for each American. The bulk of the land is in the western states, including Alaska. Far from many Americans, yet this land is important to us all, no matter where we live. It's managed by the Interior Department's Bureau of Land Management.
The Bureau of Land Management was formed in 1946, designed to really meet the needs of ranchers and mining companies. That all changed in 1976.
Controversy over the use of the resources of the public lands has intensified in recent years. The Bureau must resolve conflicting interests within the multiple use and sustained yield principles of the 1976 Federal Land Policy and Management Act. The Act directs the Bureau to administer the public lands for the benefit of all Americans.
With FLPMA, the federal government said, from now on, the public domain lands that are managed by the Bureau of Land Management will be managed in a multiple use philosophy. We will provide for recreation and environmental issues, and will meet the Endangered Species Act. No longer was the BLM merely there to do what ranchers and mining companies wanted them to do. That's when the unhappiness began with the miners and the ranchers.
Story that has captured national headlines and is continuing to stir controversy in a rural part of southern Nevada.
The root of the issue is a 20-year-long battle between a farmer and the federal government. Rancher Cliven Bundy has refused to pay grazing rights for his cattle that roam the public land surrounding his 160-acre farm.
But the BLM considers the animals as trespass cattle. And since Bundy will not pay $1 million in grazing fees accrued over the years, officials have now hired cowboys and helicopters to round those cattle up.
In the Bunkerville situation, to my understanding, the Bundy family had been ranching in that part of Nevada before BLM became an agency. And when BLM was formed, the deal was they would improve grazing lands and improve water for cattle. As time moved on, the deal changed. And it was no longer about improving grazing and water rights. It was about the restriction and access to those lands, which those ranchers generationally had relied on.
My rights are all older than BLM even existed, but my rights were created through beneficial use. And so beneficial use means we use the forage and the water from the very first pioneers come here.
Bundy had an argument that he had a grandfathered right to graze on that land because he was doing it for the last 140 years.
Grazing allotment requires a permit, and there is a fee attached to that permit. Mr. Bundy decided he was not going to pay those grazing permits.
He thought he had no duty to pay for a grazing permit because he had everything that the permit required. He had private commensurable property, which is what the law of the permit says. You have to have that. Well, he did. And he had to have water. And if memory serves, he had adjudicated water rights where he had the water. And so he figured, why should I pay the feds for that right? Now, the feds will tell you what the answer is, and that is because we say so.
When you don't pay your grazing permit, it's just like if you rent an apartment and you don't pay your rent, you get evicted.
Federal rangers stood with tasers ready and dogs poised to go on the attack.
What'd they do, Evan? They tased me twice. Tased ya?
These protesters came within inches of law enforcement trying to get the BLM to leave this section of public land.
We're sick of you being here!
The Bundy family says they're willing to put themselves in danger, not just for cattle, but essentially their livelihood. They claim federal rangers are killing their cattle in the process of rounding them up.
In 2014, they came down upon my family and put us under siege and threatened that they were going to kill us, that this would be another Waco or Ruby Ridge, in their own words, if we resisted in any way. They were killing the cattle from the helicopter and from the ground. They were separating the baby calves from their mothers, leaving the baby calves, brand new baby calves out in the desert to die.
They ended up calling a virtual who's who people's army into southern Nevada, armed patriot groups, militia members who said that they would act out violently if the federal government went to enforce court orders.
It's time the states take back our public lands. The BLM doesn't know how to manage jack.
We rallied and went up and gave them a choice to either kill us or to leave.
In a song.
No,
it.
It's the people or not. And you guys need to leave.
Okay.
You need to leave. That's the
I'm
turn.
trying to de-escalate the situation.
They stood in a line, facing a line as big as theirs of federal agents. And somebody said, stand down. And that was the smartest thing I ever saw the federal government do.
The West has now been won!
When you have an event in a particular location at a particular time where you have teams of people coming from across the country who are armed to challenge the enforcement of an order, sometimes a tactical retreat is the best way to avoid a loss of life. And I think the federal government and the Bureau of Land Management made the correct decision at that time in retreating. The problem was people in the anti-government, the wise use movement, took that as a victory. And what it did was cause the rhetoric to rise to a level where they were looking for other Bunkervilles to take place in different parts of the West.
We're going to kick the BLM out of the state, kick all the other federal agencies out of the state that aren't authorized to be here, and get this right. I'm confident that our state will get it right, and I'm confident that all the other states will get it right as well.
It brought attention to the plight of ranchers, of miners, of timber workers. They had the ability to stand up to this oppressive force that BLM has been exerting throughout the country.
So when the judge sentenced them, he said it would be cruel and unusual if I demanded that they spend the 5-year minimum in prison for 140 acres. He said that. So he sentenced Dwight to 3 months and Stephen to 1 year and 1 day. Dwight and Stephen did their time. They came home. After they came home, the U.S. federal government decided to pursue the mandatory minimum.
The sentencing judge at that time deviated from what the law allowed as far as sentencing guidelines went. The prosecution filed an appeal on the decision, and that appeal went to the Ninth Circuit Court.
The Ninth Circuit Court said the original sitting judge did not have the authority to not give the mandatory minimum. Judges absolutely have no authority when it comes to sentencing. They just, it says mandatory minimum, so that's what you got to give.
We thought, no, this can't, no way, we've been through all this stuff. And everybody said mandatory minimum under this charge is 5 years.
That's where the Hammonds, I think, really didn't understand the implications that if they gave up their right to appeal, they thought that the prosecution wouldn't have any rights to appeal either, and that wasn't the case. The Hammonds were resentenced, and they reported to prison on January 4th.
Double jeopardy is a circumstance where you cannot be tried twice for the same charge. The Hammonds were not tried twice. What happened was the Court of Appeals sent the case back to the trial court and said, you will do it right. You will sentence them according to the law. The judge made a legal error, and the Court of Appeals corrected it, and that's why the Hammonds are back in prison now. It's not double jeopardy.
Why should they pay for the judiciary system making a mistake? I think if you serve your time, you served your time.
we are supposed to have a fair and balanced justice system. Sending a 74-year-old rancher back to prison after he served his sentence in entirety is not an American value. It's unjust.
I think the judge that made that decision should be sanctioned. I still think that today. He violated the very rules that he was obligated to defend.
The rule was pretty plain, and I don't know what a mandatory minimum is, but we've had a bunch of attorneys sitting there for I don't know how many days, and all of them know what it is. And I can't believe that this is what's going to come down at us, that they've already served their time. That part of your life was over with. Well, that's not the case if the government's after you. The doorbell rang early in the morning, and I don't get up really early, so I'm thinking bad thoughts of him already. I answered the door, and he said that he was Ammon Bundy, and he asked me if I was Mrs. Hammond, and I said, yeah, and he said, I'd like to talk to you.
One Monday night, a message came on my phone, another article about the Hammonds. And immediately, this overwhelming urge came upon me to find out about the Hammonds.
I had read about them in the newspaper. We sure could see a lot of similarities between the way that they were being treated down there, not knowing them or anything about their situation, and the way we were being treated up here. And he handed me a letter.
And then that next morning, I felt this urge again, this desire to begin to write. I got on my knees and I asked the Lord and said, Lord, if you want me to write something, then please help me clear my mind and show me what I should write. The Lord was not pleased with what was happening to the Hammonds. What was happening to them, if it was not corrected, would be a type and a shadow of what would happen to the rest of the people across this country. And then once I got the letter written, I felt this desire, this urge to go to Burns and go to the Hammonds Ranch.
It was a good letter. It was a very nice, kind letter. When I got through reading it, I looked at him and I said, and who wrote the letter? Because I'd never had a man around my house that could write a letter like that. And he said, I did. And then I hesitated for a minute. And he says, well, I have to tell you the truth. He said, my wife got up before I left and she changed the spelling for me and she printed it to where you could read it.
Susie gave me a call and said, these folks were in town. Their names were Ammon Bundy, and did I remember them? Oh, yeah, the fella that had the cows on the range that the BLM was trying to get off his allotment land. And she said, yeah, those are the folks, and they've come into town to show us our support.
We were in a very similar situation. People came to our defense, and because the people came, we now are free. And she began to get hope. And then she shared them with Dwight, and he began to get a little hope that possibly the American people might be able to do something about these gross violations of their God-given rights.
Before he left, he brought in a box of apples. And I said, what time did you leave home? And he said 3:30 or something. And I said, and you picked apples before you left home to bring to my house? He said, well, I had to bring something. And he said, and I have to tell you that I didn't pick them off the tree. He said, they fell off the tree, and I just picked them off the ground and put them in a box, but they're good apples. He's just a kind, generous man.
It's like from then, it just escalated.
One of our founders, BJ Soper, lives up in Bend. BJ became aware of the Hammond situation because it's just a couple hours from where he lives. He drew that attention to leadership of PPN, the founders. We all traveled to Burns and sat down with the Hammond family, interviewed them, and then we went over and we sat down with Sheriff Ward. That was when I first met Ammon Bundy. Ammon and I did not see eye to eye on some of the methodology and tactics and things that he was discussing. He was a little more aggressive in his stance.
What the Bundys had wanted the Hammonds to do was to not turn themselves in. They wanted the sheriff actually to protect the Hammonds and not let the federal marshals take them.
They flat out told me, either you tell the federal government these people are not going back to prison, or we're going to bring thousands of people to town and do that for you.
The Harney County Sheriff is certainly not going to go and interfere with another jurisdiction's result in a criminal case. He has no basis to do that. He has no right to do that.
You've got a lawful and binding sentence. We can't pick and choose who should serve their jail sentences and who shouldn't.
So the Hammonds said, absolutely not. We are going to turn ourselves in. We are going to follow the law, and we can't have anything to do with that.
The sheriff ignores us for weeks, and basically he will not stand. So then we go to the commissioners. We say, hey, look, we need you to put an evidential hearing board together so that you can expose these corruptions that are going on and make sure that this doesn't happen so it doesn't set a precedent.
They went to the county commissioners, and I was openly smiling and kind of picking on my two county commissioners. Hey, guys, sure glad he's coming to see you and not me. Eventually, he came into this office and gave me about a 10-minute tirade on the Constitution. And I said, Mr. Bundy, thank you for your perspective, and I'd like to tell you what my perspective is on the Constitution and the one I think is correct. And he said, I'm not interested, and walked out of here.
At that point, PPN was fact-finding. We wanted to make sure what was happening in the Hammonds was factual and accurate. We wanted to have the opportunity to get the sheriff and local law enforcement perspective on it. We all left there with, okay, we will probably have a support rally, and PPN scheduled a support rally for the Hammonds in December.
Hey guys, what's up? Blaine Cooper. I'm in Burns, Oregon, and we're here to support the Hammonds. Now, Joe's going to give you a little information about what's going on out here. Joe?
Basically, where we're standing right now, this is a call out, an alert to all patriots, constitutionalists, militias, and good Americans who believe in the Constitution. We are doing a patriot convoy in Burns, Oregon.
Militia groups from out of state came to show support for two Oregon ranchers who must go back to prison for starting fires that burned on federal land, even though they already served time for the charges.
I believe there was roughly around 400 people. They call themselves patriot groups. Idaho 3% was involved. The Central Oregon Constitutional Guard. There's an umbrella group called the Pacific Patriots.
I was concerned that these people were going to come in here and they were going to ransack downtown and tear things up.
The rally was put on very professionally. We were told right off the bat, there will be no radical behavior, They were going to throw pennies out on the sidewalk at the sheriff's office.
Some protesters also blame the Harney County Sheriff for not protecting the residents of the county from the federal government. They threw pennies onto the sidewalk in front of Sheriff David Ward's office.
Threw I don't know how many dollars worth of pennies at my windows and doors out here. And I read somewhere on the internet that was to signify the sheriff selling out his citizens.
Nothing that went on with the Hammonds as it relates to the arson case that they got resentenced on had anything to do with the Harney County Circuit Court or the sheriff. You got to be a special kind of dedicated to come and demonstrate in front of an empty building, because it was a Saturday. They were going to come and do this thing that had no connection with the underlying problem in January when it's, 8 degrees outside.
More than 100 carrying signs and flags.
Go Hammonds! Yeah!
Marching in a convoy to the rancher's home. They're here to show their support.
The most humbling experience. That anybody could have.
I'd been trying to get it in the news media for months. I'd been writing Fox. I'd been writing ABC, NBC, you name it. I tried to get online and send them notes and letters and stuff. And can you please, report on this? Can you please report on this? And then all of a sudden the Bundy show up and, oh, baby.
Dwight says it feels like a life sentence at his age.
This makes it over for me. Not very happy about that.
But then everything went crazy.
We got back to Safeway, and Ammon got up and he said, well, the fairgrounds is rented for anybody that wants to go out there, but we're going to go make a hard stand. Anybody that wants to go with us can. Anybody that doesn't want to, that's fine too. What in the hell is going on?
But those that understand that they came to make a hard stand, those that know what's going on here and have seen it for many, 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 many years, those who are ready to actually do something about it, I'm asking you to follow me and go to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And we're going to make a hard stand. Now, there are already agents on the roads that have blocked the road. And they do not want us to go out there. And we're going to go out there anyway.
People started approaching me going, hey, Emma's going out the refuge. I'm like, what are you talking about? Why? He says he's going to take it over.
We received a 911 call from somebody who had been in the vehicles with them and said, hey, a bunch of guys just jumped out, took over the refuge. And they're going through military style, clearing these rooms. And he got scared and left and reported it.
The county clerk called me and said, boy, did you hear Bundy just took over the refuge? And I thought he was kidding.
And the community at that point, which was incredibly supportive, completely 180s and turns very upset and hostile. And so we're trying to give them guidance on how they can take steps to have their voice heard in the local government. And now we've got the refuge being occupied.
Armed men took the refuge, went through clearing the buildings, and had made statements along the lines of don't fire unless fired upon. There's nothing peaceful about that.
We have taken over the refuge. We have made a hard stand. We need you to come. We need those of you who understand what is happening in this country to come and to stand.
I was 33. I was single. I had 3 children of my own at the time, and I met him at a church dance. Everyone took a partner in a circle, and as the bell rang throughout the music, then you would change partners. I thought, oh my gosh, that cute cowboy is never going to get around to me. There's quite a few couples in this circle. Lo and behold, the dance ended with him as my last partner. That was our first meeting. After that, he asked me out, and 14 days later, we were married.
Hello, everyone. This is Lloyd Fridicum. It's September 2014. I'm out here on my ranch. It's great out here. The rains have come this summer. The grass is tall. It's still green. My cows are fat. Just feeling really grateful for all the blessings that I'm enjoying right now. But it doesn't take too much to see that dark storm clouds are gathering.
We started listening to the news and heard of the Bundy situation. And that's when my husband first kind of started listening and trying to understand what it was that Cliven was not agreeing with. When he heard Cliven and heard his position of states' rights, my husband asked if he could ride. And Cliven said, be here first thing in the morning. I was pretty worried for him.
and there were a lot of agents tacked out with the full gear. They returned the cows and they left.
Hello, everyone. This is Leroy Fernicum. I think I'm pretty upset this evening. I've been going since 5 this morning. I'm headed out and taking a load of cows out to my winter range. I'll be back sometime tonight in the dark. But I've been following what's happening over in Bend, Oregon with that ranching family over there, the Hammond family. And I'm pretty upset with what DeBellam has done to them. Actually, I'm really angry. They threw him in jail. They fined him tremendous amount of fines. And now it looks like they're facing 5 more years in prison. These are real lives. These are real people. And by dang, I'm angry about it.
A call came in and asked if he wanted to go up to Burns to attend the rally. He packed a backpack with an overnight set of clothes and he left that evening. During the end part of the rally, Ammon approached them with the idea of going to Malheur.
Lavoy, I'm doing this for my kids. I have 20 grandkids, daughters and sons. I want them to be free. We'll uphold the Constitution. We'll return these resources to the people. It belongs to the people of Harney County, these good folk. And so I'll stand here with my friends.
All right, let's take you to Oregon now, where armed protesters have taken over the headquarters of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge.
They're calling on other so-called American patriots to join them and to stand up against the government in Washington.
It just didn't make sense to me. I'd only met Ammon one time. I didn't know what he was trying to prove or could prove or why he went out there in the middle of the winter.
The militias say they're not ruling out resorting to violence either if police try to remove them from the federal premises.
I was mad. I was upset because I had heard that it was a hostile takeover of the refuge and they broke into things, and we heard all these horror stories of what was going on.
It went from a good thing to a, oh no, because now they were being kind of lawless and they were packing guns.
And I am 100% willing to lay my life down to fight against tyranny in this country.
Then I had a friend who went by the refuge and said, I don't know what everybody's talking about. There's like 8, maybe 10 dudes freezing their butts off around a campfire.
The buildings were all unlocked. The keys were there for them. There was no one there. Just said open to the public, and that was it.
We kind of started realizing what was really going on, that it wasn't this big military type operation, that it was more of a sit-in, an occupation.
We plan on hurting no one. We're only restoring freedom, liberties, so that these good people can use their lands and resources again. And that is why we're here.
When we first heard the reports about armed men taking over the refuge, I think you had a certain image in your mind. When I got there, it was kind of offsetting.
There becomes a time when people are ignored to the point where they're frustrated. They don't know what else to do. They see an injustice, but all levels of government are ignoring that, and the prudent methods are not allowed to the people. And that is when the people have a right to take a hard stand.
They were having press conferences and they were all out. Most of the people that were armed were either holstered or just not showing it. It seemed that they were doing a very coordinated effort to not show their weapons, at least not in the public or at least not in the front where they were having their press conferences.
I mean, we've stood in protest, we've waved signs, we've marched around buildings, we've done every single thing we possibly could. And it was time to do something in offense rather than just defense.
We were sitting here looking at each other going, well, what do we do now? I mean, we cannot let this set as a precedent. It wasn't like we raided down in here, we walked down in here. I didn't even have a weapon on me.
This happened like that. It happened quick. The public was not aware that we've been in town here meeting with these people, learning about the history, learning about the tyranny and the oppression that they're living under. This was a last chance, last stand situation. It's not like we just came out here and did this.
You have what are basically conservative, Christian, patriotic, flag-waving, hardworking American ranchers. Okay, these guys are not terrorists. Okay, they have a grievance. They feel pushed to such desperation that they take a desperate action like this to engage in an armed occupation. It's difficult for a fair-minded person to immediately determine who is right and who is wrong.
We've got to return the rights to the people. We cannot allow this to happen again. We encourage everybody to stand up for the Constitution peacefully. We encourage particularly, we reach out to the county commissioners. We reach out to the state legislatures. Okay, these lands belong to the state and her people. These rights belong to the people. Please uphold your oath of office and protect them.
What are these guys doing? What are they thinking? There's a time and place for everything. And I fully understand Ammon's message. I fully understand the frustration. I don't think the execution at that time and place was the appropriate time. PPN and leadership came out and we denounced it, but we understood why he was saying it.
The media portrayal was essentially one of armed militia going crazy and taking over this federal facility.
We didn't want conflict. Nobody wants to have any bloodshed. That's the media trying to stir it up with militants and all these big scary words, these words that have become scary to the public. Militia.
It's very important that each of you know this is intended to be a peaceful occupation, if so be, if you want to use those words. This is intended to be peaceful. We want all people to be safe. We want all law enforcement lives to be safe. We want our lives to be safe. The only reason that we have guns here is for our own personal protection and safety.
Right now,
The only reason that we have guns here is for our own personal protection and safety.
Right now, the threat level isn't as high or intense, so we don't walk around full kit, slung weapons everywhere. There may be a few individuals like that, but one of our number one orders to all the men and women here, never, ever, ever fire unless fired upon. And we will stand our ground with that.
We are calling out at this time because of intel that we have received from a solid source that the FBI is indeed planning on moving on us, if you will.
I had put out a request for assistance from the Oregon State Sheriff's Association. And since it was a federal wildlife refuge and had been taken, I requested that the FBI handle that investigation.
We are preparing to defend ourselves, preparing to defend the people of Harney County, and we're preparing to expose this corruption that has been going on for years, and it needs to end here. Thank you.
When I grew up, I never got out of line. I never spoke out of turn. I was one of those kids when I walked in class in Sunday school when I was a little kid, all the other kids were rowdy, and I always folded my arms and trying to it came natural to me to be in line. And so this is very out of character for me because I've always tried to follow the rules. And because, do you know I don't have a speeding ticket today? I do have one warning. This choice is solely mine. Nobody asked me to do this. Bundy's didn't ask me to do this. They didn't stop me. They respected my choice. But this choice, this decision is mine and mine alone, and I will live with it. And I'll bear the consequences, whatever they may be.
I was stunned at the escalation of FBI presence. They had turned the county courthouse into a fortress. They had ringed it with chain link cyclone fencing. They had put in jersey barriers for like ramming. Those guys were kitted up for warfare with more kit that I had seen in Afghanistan.
The amount of escalation and force that they were willing to use for a handful of protesters was very shocking. We were 35 miles away from the town. Nobody ever threatened anybody. I don't understand where the level of fear came from.
They shut the BLM down. They shut the Forest Service down. They shut the schools down. There wasn't a gun at the refuge that would shoot 30 miles.
We in this land, we grow up plinking tin cans with 22s, hunting jackrabbits, and the first thing we're taught is what? Do not point guns at people. And so I have never in my life pointed a gun at a person, and I never intend to. You know, they should never point a gun at me, and I shall not point a gun back, and we shall leave it at that. But I will live under a clear sky till the day I die.
Worst case scenario, they come down and kill us all. I don't think they want to do that because they still lose. The American people across from ocean to ocean will retaliate, and their power will be taken away from them.
We know that what we're doing is right. We know that this is constitutional, and we know that we're trying to improve this country.
I know what our government can do, and I didn't want these people to get hurt. I'm just out here to keep people safe, make sure there's no shots going off. If the FBI did come, they would come dark with night vision. They've got helicopters, MRAPs, all that fancy technology. They've got unlimited resources, and we're just a bunch of guys out here with rifles that we bought a couple of years ago. There's some guys out here with rifles from World War II. They're ready too. They've only got 5 shots, but they're ready. I have a feeling if the FBI did come here, that nobody would be leaving alive.
With the escalation of FBI presence, it became very concerning that they were going to try and go after these guys violently. There was a discussion as what do we do? And so the decision was made that PPN would take a neutral position. We would not endorse, support, or other, but it became Ammon, you guys stay on the refuge, government, FBI guys, you stay on your side of the line. Keep the separation here. You two have issues you want to discuss and work out. Your civil disobedience, drawing attention to land use. They can do that. Keep your distance.
We have every constitutional right to be doing what we're doing because it very clearly states in the Constitution that the federal government does not have the right, does not have the authority from the people to come down into the states and to control its land and resources. If they are to control land and resources in the state, then it has to be properly ceded to the federal government. And the way that's done is outlined in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17.
Under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, Congress will have authority with the consent of the legislature over forts, arsenals, dockyards, magazines, and other needful buildings. That's all they can have as far as places in the state of Oregon. This whole reserve here is unconstitutional, and the states have to, well, of course, right now the militias are stepping up to take this land back from the federal government and giving it to the states.
There is a federal central power called the federal government that says that they own and control 1/3 of the landmass of this country. Now, they have complete legislative power. A man just sitting behind the desk can write a statute that has the force and effect of law. If I or the rancher gets contrary with that, there is a ranger, a BLM ranger, that is armed with a gun that enforces that statute. If you get contrary more, you're hauled before a federal court. Now, neither the bureaucrat is elected nor accountable to me, and the ranger is not elected nor accountable to us, the people, and the judges aren't. All three branches of power are combined into one without representation. So this is a serious issue to freedom.
Everything that we live in, the cars we drive, the clothes we wear, everything comes from the earth. When those resources are restricted or controlled to the point where people can't access them, they can't use them, they can't benefit from them, then what it does is it puts people into poverty. A perfect example of that is Harney County. At one time, Harney County was the wealthiest county in the state, and now it's the poorest county in the state. And it is directly connected with the federal government coming in and controlling its land and resources.
Well, these are the best of times to come on down to Hines.
In the 20s, Edward Hines Lumber Company had a 50-year contract for cutting timber here. This town was amazingly wealthy. The mill was operating lots of lumber. We were number one in the state for per capita income for at least 1 year in the 70s.
Tonight, we look at a battle that's raging in the United States over an endangered bird. The northern spotted owl is said to be on the verge of extinction. Logging in the Pacific Northwest has almost eradicated its habitat.
Biologists believe this bird must have the large trees of the ancient forest to survive. There are only 3,000 pairs left, and they say if it goes, it means the entire ecosystem and all who live in it are at risk.
The environmental industry got their act together, put the focus on the spotted owl, and undermined the timber economy. Within 6 months, we lost 1,000 jobs in this town, in a county that had around 8,000 population. It was absolutely devastating.
We're in a tower. These towers are actually used to detect fires from long distances, and we use it for observation in case the feds decide to roll in here and kill us. It was kind of scary for the first couple of days because we thought that, as we've seen throughout history, Ruby Ridge and Waco, Ruby Ridge, I mean, the FBI and ATF came in and they shot a pregnant lady, a pregnant woman who was unarmed. So they've been known to come in and kill people. It originally started off with the Hammonds, but I've been fighting the BLM for years now. I was at the Bundy Ranch Standoff. The BLM's original role were land janitors. Now they're armed with SWAT teams and attack helicopters and weapons of war. Why would they need that? They're just supposed to be land janitors. And they should not constitutionally exist. The goal of this occupation is, one, to get clemency for the Hammonds. We'd like them out of prison. And also we'd like to see the control of these lands go back to their rightful owners and just give back into the hands of the people of Harney County. They are oppressed in the highest order. They're so afraid to speak out because if they speak out, they're afraid that the BLM and other entities are going to steal their grazing permits and everything else, which is actually a grazing right.
We have a situation in this county where the Bureau of Land Management, the Fish and Wildlife Service, have teamed up and taken hundreds of thousands of acres away from the people. It has brought wealth and power to these government officials and put the people in duress and put them in poverty. It is acts like this that expose the true problem.
So this argument evolved into, we're going to take this and we're going to give it back to the ranchers. You can't set the precedence that it's okay to just go take something over and say, we're going to decide who this goes to.
The Constitution of the United States does not allow the federal government to own land. This land will go back to the people of Harney County, and they will be able to use the land and resources for their benefit.
There are a lot of people who will tell you the federal government can only own small things like forts and docks and all kinds of military things. The Constitution does say that. It's talking about a part of the Constitution that was making provision for a new capital for the United States, and the provision was that they could pay whatever states they took the land from no more than 10 square miles, and that they would make provisions for the docks and the magazines for ammunition and other military forts. Well, that was to defend the nation's capital, which had not yet been established, and that was just something in the Constitution to make provision that it could be created. They were just talking about what's now Washington, D.C. That's it.
Yeah, the donations are coming from all over the United States. A lot of them have come straight from the ranchers that live in the town. They appreciate everything we're doing. And it makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I'm doing something for a good cause. I'm a terrorist. Obviously, we are all terrorists here. And anybody that comes on this property is a terrorist. And the media coming in here, I don't really want to talk to them anymore because they're going out and telling everybody that we're not doing the right thing. And we are doing the right thing. You know, we all have families, we have children, we have jobs. We stepped away from that life to come over here and do some good for our community.
These people deserve better than this. Our government should know better than this. They have no feelings, no compassion for anybody in this country at all anymore. They're not representing us whatsoever. My reason for being out here with a straw book the camel's back was the fact that the media trying to make it play out that the Hammonds were, are some kind of domestic terrorist. I mean, this is a 74-year-old man. He knows he goes to prison for another 4 years. He ain't coming back out to see his family again. Over 139 acres that burn up.
Us patriots go through such bullshit. The American public has no idea.
We're pro-Constitution. The Constitution of the United States. We are pro-government. We're not anti-government. We are against people that are in power, that abuse their power in government, that do not follow the Constitution.
It doesn't matter how many there are that are for us or how many there are against us, even if there's just one person that's being terrorized or forced to live in oppression, then we need to step in and we need to help lift them up and build them up. There's one of our founding father quotes that says, it does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting the brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And that's what we're facing right now.
What they did as a protest to occupy a place where they had no right to be, it was an attempt to protect liberty the way they saw it. The way they saw it happened to be not according to the law and not even according to history. The only solution if you don't like the law is to change the law. You have two choices. One of them is through the democratic process and the other one is through revolution. When you've got an army bigger and better than the United States, let me know.
Federal government, go home. Take care of federal things. Secure our borders. Protect our nations. Keep commerce regular. And just a couple other things. Get the heck out of Dodge and leave the rest for the state and the counties to take care of. Let the people be free. It's high time, dadgummit. Get out of town.
You cannot go to war against the federal government. This is not 240 years ago. There is no group of armed militiamen that can go up against the awesome power of the federal government. It ain't going to happen.
Best case scenario is that the people of the county stand and take claim of their own rights, meaning they stop paying the federal government to manage their rights. They stop entering into contracts that take their constitutional rights away. Once that is done and recognized, we want to see the Hammonds freed.
Dwight Hammond's same age as my father. My father's pretty healthy still. He can saddle up his horse and ride with me. He helps me when I need some help. You know how many more years when you're 75 are you going to be able to continue to get out there and chase those cows at a full run? You know, I'm so grateful for those few years that I still have with my father. Where's Dwight? Where's Dwight Hammond? Where is he spending those 5 years, dadgummit? If we don't get him out of prison, that's why I am sitting here on this place. Call me an occupier, call me a terrorist, call me a dadgum ignorant redneck. I don't care. I am here for Dwight Hammond and his family, and they had better get out of that prison. They need to be pardoned. Mr. Obama, you and I don't see eye to eye on probably anything, but I am appealing to your humanity, Mr. President Obama, to pardon them. That is unjust. Let them go home to their families. Let them go home to the families. I want to get the heck out of Dodge. I want to go back home to Arizona. I don't want to be here on this place, but I am here because of the actions of this federal government. And by dang, if you want to give me a warrant to come after me with the FBI, so be it. I don't care, but you better well let those Hammond families out of prison, because things are starting to heat up, and I don't think you guys actually even really care.
There was no communication. Ammon wasn't talking to the county wasn't talking to Ammon. And so that became a concern. Is you're sitting on the refuge, you're sitting in the courthouse, and the FBI is sitting in the schoolhouse, and they all are not communicating or talking to each other. So we arranged for Ammon and Sheriff Ward to meet on that road, have a discussion, and Sheriff Ward offered, I'll drive you to the county line. And we're like, that's it?
Standing side by side, Sheriff Dave Ward and protest leader Ammon Bundy talked about ending the armed takeover of the wildlife refuge. A Bundy associate wanted to talk about land rights and grievances.
I'm not here to talk about all that. I'm here to talk about offering you guys the opportunity to leave the county peacefully, get back to your families.
We pose no threat to the community whatsoever at all. It's time to get the schools open, let your community get back to living. We do not pose a threat.
And that's what I'm asking for.
But that can be done without us leaving.
At the time that I offered them the opportunity to leave and to escort them out of the state, there was a lot of different components, things going on behind the scenes there. The federal side of the House was more on board with, resolving the situation. So no charges had been filed federally, rather than charging these people locally and keeping them here. If we could resolve the situation by getting them to leave and go home and let them work it out through the legal system. Yeah, I'm sure there was going to be some consequences, but nowhere near the level of consequences that they face after a 41-day standoff.
I want to help you guys get out of here. I'll get you a safe escort out.
We're getting ignored again, Sheriff. Sheriff.
I didn't come to argue. I just came to
Not
offer you
either.
guys peaceful resolution.
Okay.
So
I appreciate it.
Once they rejected that offer and said, we're staying here, I knew that they were going to force us to deal with them. Giving in to an armed criminal takeover, but it's just not going to work. There came a point where people had to be taken into custody.
Lavoy and everybody, we're going into the next county to talk about the Constitution and how they could take their grazing rights back. They've been free to pass from the refuge and into town.
We were getting things prepared, and we had a cute family there that had arrived a few days earlier, the Sharp family. They were there to sing, and they had decided they were going to go with them to this meeting and put on one of their concerts because it just touches your heart. They're just awesome.
I heard about this protest that was happening in Oregon involving the Bundy family, and I knew the Bundy family from the 2014 standoff. So I called Ryan and I was like, what's going on up there in Oregon? He told me what they were doing and why they were protesting. And my mom and I talked about it, and she decided she was going. We were a singing family, and that was a big part of our lives, especially when we went to the Bundy Ranch. Our biggest reason for going there was to sing to everybody. And when we went to Oregon, my mom's purpose for bringing the children there was to sing to the people and sing to the FBI and just try to bring some peace and bring some happiness to a situation that was a little bit scary.
Each vehicle would leave, for safety reasons, 10 to 15-minute intervals, so they wouldn't be close together. The family had left, and the oldest daughter, who had just arrived the day before, wasn't ready.
I was supposed to be leaving with my family, and I was not ready to go. So I stayed behind, and I was going to leave with the next group that was leaving at 3:30, which would be the Bundys and Lavoy Finicum. We left in Lavoy's truck. It was about a 2-hour drive for us.
The Jeep behind us was supposed to be coming 10 to 15 minutes behind us. They came directly behind us, and for them to be right on our tail was really not what was supposed to happen. Then Lavoy up in the front noticed this bunch of vehicles, and there was an angled road there. There was a whole bunch of these SUVs and vehicles lined up.
What is that? What's going on? And I turned around and I could see all these vehicles that were coming up.
All of a sudden, it was like a wake-up call. We've been set up.
So we just saw vehicles coming up behind us. We could hear their sirens and see their lights, and we could see them pull the Jeep over.
Lavoy kept saying, "We got to get to the sheriff. We got to get to the sheriff." And that's in Grant County. We knew that he would protect us.
They started shouting to turn the vehicle off and put your hands out the window. And Lavoy didn't turn the vehicle off, but he put his hands out the window and his head, and he said, are you police? He said, we're going to the next county to talk to the sheriff.
I'm going to meet the sheriff. The sheriff is waiting for us. So you do as you damn well please. But I'm not going anywhere. Here I am, right there. Right there, put a bullet through it. You understand? I'm going to go meet the sheriff. You back down or you kill me now. Go ahead, put the bullet through me.
I can see on top of his hat is a red laser. I'm worried that they're gonna shoot him.
All right, send the woman out now. What for? Well, I'm going to ask them if they want to go out. What for? Where are we going?
I was like, okay, I'm not getting out of the vehicle. I was afraid that I'd be shot if I moved too fast or if anybody did anything.
Victoria says, I'm not getting out. Then I'm not getting out either.
I'm not turning over. I'm going into Day County. I'm going into Grant County to see the sheriff.
Well, if we duck and you drive, what are they going to do? Try to knock us out? How much further we got to go?
We got about 50 miles.
You should never have stopped.
I'm going to keep going.
Then we have to duck.
I know.
What are they going to do with Ryan?
Okay.
If we take off, where they get Ryan back? Shoot your tires out?
Most likely.
Hey, Ryan Hammond.
Why
did they pull you over? There's no service here.
Just because.
Okay, you ready?
Well, where's the
They
guns?
got him stopped. He can't get around it. I'm going to go. You guys ready?
Okay, get down.
Then you duck now. Give me that camera. Okay, give me this camera. Go.
And I looked out and I could see one vehicle behind us pursuing.
Keep going.
What about Hammond and those guys? We can't get around him. I'm going to go get help.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden, he said something about a roadblock.
Yeah. Hey on.
Okay, they're shooting.
Hey on.
Okay, we're here.
Go ahead and shoot me.
Trying to. Stay down. Stay down. Stay down. Stay down. Stay down. Damn it. Are they shooting him? Did they shoot him? You asshole. Oh my God!
I just hear a bunch of shots all at once and he fell. I started shouting that I was an EMT. I was trying to get up, trying to get out.
Is he dead? Don't get out. I am dead! Stop it. No!
Are you dead?
No! Hold on. Don't do anything. They're shooting. Don't do anything. Where the hell is Lavoy? Sit down.
I can't see.
Shut up. Stay down, Ryan. Oh, God! Stay down. Stay down. Oh, shit.
they didn't want us to get out, whoever was shooting at us. Then the next thing we knew, this blue smoke stuff started coming from the front seats towards us, and it hit my nose, and I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was choking.
You taking some? Keep going. Oh, shit. Stop! Please! Stop! Yes. Stop! That's ridiculous. Those are stupid. They're going to kill all of us? Father, please. Protect. Do it, get out.
No, don't get up.
Please. Guys. Please. Okay, they got lasers still on us.
They got lasers still on us. LaVoy got out. I think they've killed LaVoy. They just shot gas rounds into the car. We're hunkered down in here trying not to get shot.
Right then, I think was the scariest moment for me, because I thought that we were all going to die. I thought about my family, and I thought about the things that mattered in life to me, and I just thought we were all going to die.
This location.
I surrender! Can we just surrender? Okay, let's get up. Okay! That's you, Ryan. I don't know if you can get up. You get up first. Let her in first. Let her out first. You go first. Please don't kill me.
I started shouting, "We surrender, we surrender." And I finally heard someone shout back, "Send out the mail first." So Ryan got out, and while I was standing there, they said, "Stay right there. Stay with your hands where we can see them." And I could see LaVoy laying in the snow, and I could just tell that he was dead. I could see men in camouflage and in black standing between the trees. And it seemed like so many of them.
They yell at me to come, and I'm getting out of the car with your hands up, of course. They're all dressed in military gear or whatever, these green outfits, and they're like snipers. They have all these long guns, all these guns. They have all these rifles. Victoria and I were yelling at the men, "You guys are all part of murder. You just murdered a man in cold blood." She says, "I almost died today." And I said, "Yeah, Victoria, you're 18 years old. And you're going to remember this moment for the rest of your life."
I don't know. A lot of people tell me that I shouldn't have been through that at that age.
Tuesday morning, I called him to talk to him about what I was going to be doing that day. He said he was really busy, that he had interviews lined up with John. That was the last time I talked to him. I'd gone into Fredonia with my daughter for her game about 1:30, and his parents were there, and his brother was there, and my son was there, and we were all there. All of a sudden, somebody came up to me and said, "There's been something that's happened." And she was hysterical. And she was screaming and crying that the boy had been killed. And it was just unreal. It was not real. Somebody had gone into the gym and told the officials what was going on, and they stopped the game, and they brought my family into the hallway, and we told them what was going on, and they gave us privacy for a while until we could get ourselves together enough to go over to the local police station and try to get more information and confirmation, and because we were still holding out hope that it wasn't LaVoy. And that was a nightmare in itself, just going over there and making those phone calls to people who were just heartless on the other end and would just push forward or the hold button or transfer me to another agency or transfer me multiple different times and then just put me on an answering machine without answering and whether or not it was LaVoy. I thought, how could people be so unkind. And then that town had been through so much with the different groups that had come into their town and the FBI and the sheriff's department escalating fear, that they were just probably glad that it was over. To leave the vehicle as quick as he did in Shauna's video just confirms that he was indeed trying to move the threat away from those in the truck. The 18-year-old Victoria Sharp is the same age as our daughter, our youngest daughter, and I know he was worried for Ryan and Shauna as well. Those people were victims and were being shot at multiple times without ever exhibiting any threat to any of those officers. And I believe that he was murdered.
I can't imagine anything that could be bad enough that would be made better by the death of a man like LaVoy Finicum. But then I hear my husband tell me that he's scared to death in prison. And so I don't know everything.
He was shot in the back without a gun in his hand. Whether he was reaching for one or not, he never pulled a gun out of his hand.
I think they expected to shoot someone that day. I mean, they shot at the vehicle before he got out. They shot at all of us, really. Then he got out and he definitely drew their attention away from us.
His whole conviction was to protect us. And I know that he was running away from the vehicle so that he would draw the fire and they wouldn't fire upon us.
I don't think that he was murdered. LaVoy reached toward his pocket, if I remember correctly, at least 3 times.
I had an investigation done and an autopsy done myself. I picked up his body. I took it to the medical examiner, so I know that he was shot in the back 3 times. And I know that those exit wounds came and exited on the left side, and that is where he is reaching each time. But his hands go back up in the air multiple times as he reaches for a shot. He goes back up and his hand is empty again. He did not go for a weapon, or he would have had the weapon in his hand.
It's really hard to separate all the factors that led to a tragic death. At the end of the day, LaVoy Finicum was the one who had the last best opportunity to prevent violence. Had he complied with the orders of the officers, like everyone else in that vehicle, he would be alive today.
And unfortunately, there was life lost through the course of this, but I still believe that they found the most peaceful resolution they could.
I had asked these folks to go home. It's been said many times, you could have taken them into custody here or here or here. There were a lot of opportunities, yes, but no safe opportunities to take somebody into custody after statements had been made that they weren't willing to be taken into custody. If there was a failure somewhere in trying to resolve this, it would be that loss of life.
When you look at it, it's tough. You're watching, in my opinion, the assassination of an American. I walked that site. Having military background, I know what an L ambush is. They had put their vehicles in a blocking position, and they had set up along one side of it, the high ground. They had actually cut the tree branches so they're about 4 to 6 inches to use as rifle rests. If you went 150 feet past that corner, there was a 3/4 mile straightaway. It had sloping sides and was snow covered. You could have spike stripped it, let him drive down, his tires would have flattened, and he had no place to go. I understand there are criminals, But an American that wants to take care of his family, has Christian values, has strong integrity and morals, is shot with his hands up because the FBI team lead amped up his people that he was an enemy. Something's seriously fucking wrong in this country.
After Mr. Finicum lost his life, we were able to get a blockade. What that is just one more armed element you have to go through. Usually, as in most military operations, when the leadership's gone, the rest of the thing falls apart. Proved to be true. Over the next, 24, 48 hours, everybody scattered to the wind, with the exception of the 4 that were left at the end. And I never did understand what their point was.
David Fry, Jeff Banta, and Sean and Sandy Anderson are the last 4 remaining at the refuge, 40 days after armed protesters took it over.
The FBI, local and state police cleared out after a standoff at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge came to an end. About 9:40 this morning, 3 occupiers surrendered to police and were taken into custody. A 4th, the final protester, refused to leave, but supporters, including evangelist Franklin Graham and a Nevada lawmaker, convinced him to surrender, and he did after a simple request.
He ate a cookie, asked everyone to say hallelujah. When they said hallelujah, he came out.
You know, they say that there was an armed standoff in Harney County. That is a total bullshit lie. There were people that were exercising their Second Amendment rights. There were people that were on guard, but none of those people ever pointed their guns at anybody.
I miss him. I miss him a great deal. I'm learning to do everything that he used to do. When you are a married couple, you're a team, and you each have your own little areas of responsibility, and you count on each other. Was I angry at the Bundys? Oh no. I've only caught myself being angry a couple of times, and I've quickly brought that into check. I know that what he did, he believed in, and I see him as a hero, not a martyr. I forgive those who have killed him.
I usually get a call every night or every other night, mostly just for him to know that I'm okay. And he tells me that he doesn't feel safe.
What's left? They've given up their right to appeal. So the only thing left is to ask for the president for executive clemency, to actually look at the case and see whether he thinks it's fair and whether he thinks what they did deserves 5 years in prison, and asking for mercy.
I keep hoping that there's some commutation or clemency or pardon or something, that there's somebody out there somewhere that can understand what a travesty our federal government is.
These were my brothers, my friends. They're locked up, and one of them's dead.
If Bundy had had his act together, he wouldn't have allowed the militia anywhere close to him. He'd have done an occupation for a period of time and left, and today the law would be on trial. The regulation, all that stuff would be on trial, as opposed to him being on trial.
What's happening to these cultures? They're being murdered.
Ranchers are worried about coming up. They don't want to become the target of the bureaucrats.
Martin Luther King got it right. He did peaceful demonstrations, sit-ins, walked across bridges. Bundy did it with firearms.
I want to make something clear here. We will see other standoffs. The overall majority of this movement is peaceful, but there are extremely dangerous threads which, when the time comes, will yield towards confrontation as opposed to reason.
Pretty tough to feel American when your own government has a vendetta against you. Yes, I still love this country. And I wish we could fix it.
The first and most important rule of gun running.
Why'd you do that?
Is never get shot with your own merchandise.
So now you're gonna have to buy it. It's a used gun.
You get rich by giving the poorest people on the planet the means to continue killing each other.
Sell by the kilo.
There are men going through our garbage cans. Is there anything I should be worried about?
She doesn't know how you pay for all this.
How many car salesmen talk about their work? Their products kill more people every year than mine. At least mine has a safety switch.
I would tell you to go to hell, but I think you're already there.
Pilot, stand by, please. Have we done?
I'm just deciding which dark secret to reveal first.
Fearless is about teaching people to fear less and really making the point that the people they might put on a pedestal, they don't succeed because they don't have fear. They succeed because they've learned how to manage their weaknesses, how to manage their fears, and how to capitalize on maybe one or two key strengths.
What the turning point for me with bombing was, I remember one time just being on stage and I was bombing, and I just pictured all my friends watching me, laughing at me in the back, and then that got me to laugh at myself.
I wouldn't say I'm fearless. I just try to be funny. I'm not that deep. Do you want to do this instead of me?
I'm not. Nice sneakers.
As far as long-form, dense, tactical interviews go, this is about as entertaining as it can get, while focusing on making it usable.
Don't be afraid to try crazy things.
I thoroughly enjoyed the format, and the audience component was a great idea.
Be in a position where you have thought of everything, but don't let any of that slow you down.
Tim had a lot of penetrating questions, quite a few of which I have never heard before.
I think the show in a number of practical ways will help people to overcome their fears by helping them to define their fears.
I just vowed on that day I will never make another note of music that I don't believe in with all my heart.
The most successful people you can imagine have many different flaws. Therefore, none of those things are fatal flaws in you yourself.
School was just hard for me in general because I just hadn't developed good social skills.
There's no magic to it. Part of my goal is really to just go behind the scenes with these people, dig into their brain, and get the specifics.
The people that are watching have a deeper sense of how they can pursue what matters most to them. To love deeply, to care, to have a life that has meaning, and maybe pursue the path of mastery.
5, 4, 3, 2.
What makes this show different, it's not just the highlight reels, is a real focus on obstacles, struggles, challenges.
So the same lessons you're going to go and learn there, the things that are going to help you in business. People that are going through things watching this that are way harder than stuff that I've ever had to go and face. And I hope it helps them in some way.
Looking at how all of us as humans, as imperfect creatures, can carve our own paths.
So after, a couple hard years and running through millions of dollars, and a lot of it is my own money, we had to go out of business.
So we have first roadkill story.
It was fun to kind of talk about the breadth of my entrepreneurial life and not just focus on the last 10 years of Tom's.
We can use key photographs. We can do research and pull up videos that perhaps the guests themselves they haven't seen in 10, 20 years.
Tim did a ton of research. I was pretty amazed. There were stories I didn't even know that I ever told anybody. Maybe he had one of his hacker friends go into my phone, listen to my conversations.
No matter where you are, no matter what your jobs, no matter what your obligations, there are things that you can borrow from these people.
I think of it as a pyramid. First, I have to be able to not smoke pot, not become an alcoholic, manage my money, all the way to the top.
This is a refreshing blast of cold water to wake you up and to get you to take action. And that's what I want to share with people who watch the show.
Fearless with Tim Ferriss premieres Tuesday, May 30th at 8. Only on Audience.
Your brother was in the luggage level.
I'll fix this.
This is the expression of who I am.
If it's in your blood, it's in your blood. I don't know that you ever saw the evolve.